They laugh, cry, make weird sounds, and speak clearly. When they enter human form, their feet and sometimes their hands are backwards, described as being very ugly. They project a lot of energy, causing a very uneasy, nauseating, anxious feeling once you are made aware of their presence, especially if eye contact is made. These little entities shapeshift into bugs. Jealousy, repressed anger, pride, and mockery are their doorways. What are they?
Hush, little baby, don't say a word.
This is a conspiracy channel.
Welcome to the Hush channel. We can hurt them, we can help. Come laugh. There's a story the villagers of Wadi al-Kamal whisper only when the moon is thin. They say that high in the wadis, where the cliffs fold into narrow passageways, and the wind sounds like distant chanting, there stands a small black doorway carved into the stone. It is barely 3 feet high, far too small for a man, a human man, that is. The people call it Bab al-Kasarin, the door of the little ones. They insist it is the dwelling place of Kisor Jinn, the dwarf jinn who haunt abandoned thresholds and forgotten shrines. Long ago, a shepherd named Rami took his goats through the wadi during a season of drought. Water was scarce and the animals were restless. One evening, as the sun bled into the mountains, he heard a strange sound, a faint clicking, like metal tapping against stone. His goats froze, their ears tilted toward the small black doorway. The air grew cold, unnaturally so. Rami stepped toward the opening, lantern raised. Inside, the darkness swallowed the light. He thought at first that the sound was dripping water, but then it grew rhythmic, a deliberate tapping, the pattern of tiny feet walking just out of sight. The smell of old earth drifted out, mixed with something sweet and metallic, like dried blood. Rami felt the hairs on his arms rise. Then came the voice. It was not loud. It was small. Too small, as if spoken by a child who had never learned to breathe properly. Laugh, it whispered. Come, we have waited. Rami stumbled back, but the voice followed, whispering from the crack like wind forced through a reed. Your goats wander. We can hurt them. We can hurt them. We can help. Come laugh. The lantern flame snapped sideways, though there was no wind. And suddenly, standing just inside the doorway, Rami saw a shape. It was barely the height of his knee. Its limbs were short and crooked, its shoulders hunched, its head too large for its body. Its skin was the color of dust, scratched tightly over small bones. But it was the eyes that froze him, black, round, and reflecting the lantern's glow like the eyes of a beetle. The dwarf jinn stepped forward silently, its feet making no sound. Rami smelled cold stones and old incense, the scent of mosques abandoned, and tombs never touched by human hands. The creature's mouth formed a thin, unnatural smile. We keep the doors, it said. We keep what falls between places. You should not have looked inside. Rami backed away, but his lantern went out. A rush of tiny feet scurried past him, dozens of them, brushing his ankles like cold hands. He swung blindly in the dark. The goats bleated in terror. Then came the laughter. Not joyous laughter, not childlike laughter. A high, brittle chittering that rose and fell, overlapping like a swarm. It grew louder and louder until it filled the wadi. Rami dropped his lantern and ran, stumbling over rocks, scraping his knees and elbows. Behind him, the sound followed like a cloud of insects echoing off the cliffs. He did not stop until he reached his village. White-faced and shaking, his ghosts returned days later on their own, but they moved strangely afterward, as if something had frightened them into obedience. One goat never returned. Rumor says the dwarf jinn keep trophies. Rami refused to speak of what he saw, but villagers say that sometimes at night you can see a small figure standing at the mouth of the wadi, no taller than a child, with eyes like polished stones. watching. And if you are foolish enough to approach Bab al-Kasreen, the door of the little ones, you may hear tapping from within, or the faint drag of tiny limbs across ancient stone. We have it! Across the Islamic world and its surrounding cultural regions, stories of dwarf-sized or stunted jinn appear consistently. A small-bodied, malformed, and spiritually low-ranking entity described with remarkable consistency across North Africa, the Middle East, Central Asia, and South Asia, the Malay world. Descriptions of dwarf jinn nearly always begin with their physical distortion. Accounts from Morocco, Sudan, Afghanistan, and the Levant emphasize that these entities often appear short, stunted, or rather unfinished, with twisted proportions. A striking near universal trait is the presence of backward feet, a marker widely believed to distinguish jinn from humans. In some regions, their hands are also said to appear backward, or rather crooked, further emphasizing their reverse nature. Their facial features tend to mimic human expressions, but in a distorted, incomplete, uncanny valley type of way. Smiles stretched too wide, eyes too deep set, or motions that appear imitative rather than natural. This uncanny mimicry contributes to the profound discomfort many people report when encountering them. Additionally, dwarf jinn often move in insect-like ways, skittering under furniture, clinging to ceilings, or flattening into strange shapes. This aligns with another well-documented belief. These beings frequently shapeshift into insects, ranging from cockroaches and beetles to flies and centipedes. You name it! While their physical appearance is unsettling, their energetic presence is equally distinct. Folk traditions describe their aura as dense, heavy, and oppressive, creating a feeling of intense unease, especially when direct eye contact is made. This density is psychologically impactful, leading many witnesses to feel frozen or overwhelmed. You know what they say, flight, fight, or freeze. Despite this intensity, however, dwarf jinn are not considered powerful. Rather, they are viewed as low-ranking, instinct-driven scavenger spirits, the bottom dwellers of the jinn hierarchy. They lack the intelligence or influence of higher jinn like Marid or Ifrit, and instead operate on malice, mimicry, and opportunism. I mean, imagine seeing one of these things and you've never seen anything like that before. It wouldn't matter if they're the bottom of some type of hierarchy. You wouldn't be thinking about any of that. Not at all. One of the most significant qualities attributed to these entities is their relationship to spiritual distortion. In multiple regions, including Egypt, Morocco, Pakistan, and Iraq, there is a strong belief that incorrectly recited prayers, distorted mantras, or twisted religious texts can attract or even create such beings. When sacred words are mispronounced, read backwards, taken out of context, or combined with unfamiliar additions, practitioners believe that the spiritual frequency becomes dissonant. This dissonance acts as a beacon for beings whose nature aligns with misalignment itself. Dwarf jinn reportedly appear in spaces marked by instability. Old apartments, urban ruins, corners of dimly lit rooms, or domestic environments characterized by jealousy, repressed anger, or mockery. These emotional conditions are believed to feed these entities, aligning their presence with individuals who exhibit these traits. In manifestations, dwarf jinn may laugh, cry, or produce strange vocalizations, sounds that resemble human emotions but lack authentic human resonance. Some accounts describe them speaking directly, though usually in distorted, childlike, or mocking tones. They are also associated with spiritual vulnerability. During altered states such as sleep paralysis, nightmares, illness, or astral projection, during which they attempt to enter a person's energetic or dream state, or bodies. A class of parasitic, malformed spirits that function at the margins of human awareness. But they are reminders that the unseen world is not only populated by grand and powerful entities, but also by the overlooked and forgotten. The spirits that crawl, the spirits that mimic, the spirits that cling and wait for the slightest imbalance to step through. You are never truly alone, are you?
I encounter self-transforming elf machines, which are creatures, entities, perhaps, although they're not made out of matter. They're made out of, as nearly as I can figure it out, they're made out of syntax driving light. It's one of the most challenging parts of the whole psychedelic landscape. What are we to do with an elf? It's the defining characteristic of the true DMT flash. I mean, it is not subtle. It's these things mob you like badly trained Rottweilers. They come bounding forward by the dozens, by the hundreds. They jump into your body. They jump out of your body. And I've thought, it maps to some degree over the archetype of the little people, the leprechaun, the fae, and being Irish and being Jungian. I'm willing to entertain, maybe I have a special relationship to this stuff. But then in the Amazon, the people using DMT that I studied in the early 70s, the reason they did it, they said, was to speak with the little people. What puzzles me about my contacts with these beings is it conforms to, let's say, the Irish model. They are small. They live under hills, or when you're with them, you have a sense that you are somehow underground. They are full of merriment, almost to a manic and frightening level. It's sort of like a Bugs Bunny cartoon gone berserk. They are friendly, but play rough. In other words, it's a land of explosions and falling anvils. It's like a Roadrunner cartoon or something. But the overwhelming feeling is love. It's just this kind of crazy, childish affection. And they're delighted to have me in their presence. Well, now that all sort of corresponds with the Irish model or with worldwide folklore of little creatures, little people in the woods. What's happening that is not mappable onto fairyland or leprechauns or Findhornian beings or anything like that, or anything else I've ever heard of, is that these entities have an agenda. And it's a very curious agenda. They use a language which you see. It is made out of sound. In other words, it is sound, but you see it in that state. And the entire point of the encounter from their perspective seems to be to teach you to do this. They want you to transform your language. They want you to speak elfish. And, what? If you've never done DMT and you just smoked it and you're 30 seconds into this experience and this is what it's come down to, you wonder what to make of it. I've thought about this for years and years and years, and I don't know why there should be an invisible syntactical intelligence giving language lessons in hyperspace, but that certainly consistently seems to be what is happening.
Machine elves are one of the strangest and most unforgettable beings of psychedelic culture. These tiny, hyper-intelligent, constantly shifting beings that so many people encounter when they take the psychedelic compound DMT. The term itself comes from Terence McKenna, who introduced us into this section. He was an American ethnobotanist and mystic, and one of the most influential voices in the psychedelic movement during the 1970s through the 1990s. McKenna was not just experimenting with psychedelics, he was documenting and philosophizing about them. In the late 1960s, he began describing how high doses of smoked DMT did not simply give him hallucinations. It actually launched him into what he called hyperspace, a realm filled with what he named self-transforming machine elves. He described these beings as living, shifting hybrids of creature and mechanism, made of neon geometry, singing objects into existence, communicating in a language that was visible instead of simply spoken. McKenna's lectures, books, and recorded talks helped spread these descriptions around the world, turning machine elves into a shared label within psychedelic culture. Long story short, Terence McKenna coined the phrase. DMT is one of the strongest psychedelics known to science. It is found naturally in many plants and animals, and it is also one of the active compounds in ayahuasca, a sacred Amazonian brew used for centuries in indigenous shamanic ceremonies in South America. And boy, is it strong, trust me. I have personally had the experience of Mother Aya. So when DMT is smoked in its pure form, the effects come on almost instantly, peaking within seconds. People describe being ripped out of ordinary reality and dropped into a realm of complex geometry, living symbols, and impossible spaces. One of the most consistent features of high-dose DMT is that people do not just see patterns. They feel like they have met someone or something. A massive analysis of almost 4,000 real DMT trip reports posted on Reddit found that nearly half of them involved some type of entity encounter. These were not vague shadows or dream figures. They were experienced as specific beings, deities, guides, aliens, little people, gestures, and yes, machine elves. Now, Terence McKenna passed in the year 2000 at 53 years old, but if you have the time, definitely go check out his interviews and his works. I remember him saying something along the lines of how he's not a very spiritually sensitive person, so he figured back then that if he was experiencing this phenomena of the machine elves, then it was more than likely that a lot of people was experiencing this as well. And he was not wrong. In Terence Turner's The DMT Chronicles, Parmenides, Plato, and the Psychedelic, he says the following about machine elves and the elf goddess from a DMT trip.
Everything appeared very wispy and dark. I was capable of making out what was going on, but there wasn't much light flowing in this world. Next, they came to me, the self-transforming machine elves. From all directions, they appeared around me. The entire time this was going on, I heard very odd banging noises. I remained a stationary observer, and I did not think of moving anywhere, so I stayed where I was, not even moving a fraction of one of my muscles. Perhaps, I thought, they weren't even aware of my silent presence. I came upon this assumption a little too soon, however. Before I knew it, they started going through me. Yes, they went through me. I first thought that they were bumping into me. However, it turned out that when I turned my head around after an elf supposedly bumped into me, the elf appeared to be on the other side of me. The elf must have gone through me. Nonetheless, despite turning my head, I remained stationary, and they continued going right through my soul. I definitely knew now that I didn't have a body, for can a physical, tangible, corporeal entity such as an elf simply go right through another palpable, actual, definite body? Of course not. I was simply comprised of pure soul. I did not have a body. The self-transforming machine elves didn't go through all of my soul, but only portions of it. Together, combined, they might have surpassed the entire surface area of it. Still, one by one, they kept on entering and leaving different portions of my soul. They did not appear to walk, but rather they appeared to glide. It felt as if they were embedding me with a certain and unique type of perplexing information. They were changing me. As each one entered my soul, he or she implanted their own unique piece of data inside of me. With their powers combined, they were putting together the pieces of a puzzle within my soul. At the time, I couldn't make out what the elves intended this puzzle to convey. And then it happened. The elf goddess came to me. The psychedelic herself had arrived. She simply materialized out of nowhere. I saw her form. She was extremely tall, dark, and elegantly beautiful. Her skin was a dark green, as were her eyes. Her fingers were slender and long, her feet proportionately sized and dazzling. Her hair was rigorously wavy, and it came far down, all the way to her waist. She was nude, and her breasts were very voluptuous, yet perfectly shaped. She came with her hands up, a clear sign of peace. Suddenly, I heard her. She didn't even open her mouth, though. She spoke inside of my head without the slightest trace of having moved her lips.
Do you know what my elves have taught you?
I don't think so.
Allow me to help you out. I have been seen by many people, some who have made a mark in history, such as Parmenides. Yes, I am the goddess of Parmenides, the divine figure that appears in his mystical poem. Parmenides, like you, used DMT, and that is how he came about configuring his philosophical apparatus.
For those who do not know, Parmenides was an early Greek philosopher from Elea, active in the early 15th century BC, whose ideas reshaped the entire landscape of ancient thought. He argued that the world we see, full of motion, change, birth, and death, is not the true reality. For him, genuine being is one whole, unchanging, and eternal thing. He expressed these arguments in a philosophical poem that challenged the assumptions of his contemporaries and laid the groundwork for later thinkers like Plato. His insistence that reason, not the senses, reveals the nature of reality made him one of the most influential figures in the history of metaphysics. The poem of Topic's name has been lost, but it is usually called On Nature. Parmenides describes a visionary journey guided by mysterious maidens who lead him to a goddess dwelling beyond the ordinary world. This goddess opens the gates of night and day and reveals two paths he must understand: the way of truth and the way of opinion. The way of truth shows him the nature of real being, unified, motionless, and beyond time, while the way of opinion explains why humans are misled by appearances and fall into the belief that things change. Through her voice, the poem blends divine revelation with philosophy, turning his metaphysical teaching into a kind of sacred instruction about the hidden structure of existence. And that brings us to the next key figure, Rick Strassman, who is an American psychiatrist who conducted the first FDA-approved human DMT studies in the 1990s, after decades of psychedelic research being shut down. In his clinical trials, volunteers received pure DMT in a medical setting, and many of them independently reported meeting conscious, autonomous beings. Some called them angels, some called them aliens, and some described them in ways that echoed ancient religious imagery. Strassman was one of the first researchers to seriously document this phenomenon, noting how frequently people encountered what felt like intelligent presences. Even outside of academic research, descriptions of machine elves remain surprisingly consistent across different communities. Whether you are looking at Reddit threads, DMT forums, or journalistic interviews, people describe tiny elf-like or gnome-like figures made of living fractal-like, shifting, morphing, playful, and busy. They seem to be performing a kind of work like building, weaving, or maintaining the structure of whatever dimension that person has entered. Communication with them rarely happens through speech. Instead, they communicate through images, gestures, telepathy, humor, or what McKenna described as visible language. Emotionally, these encounters can go in very different directions. Many people feel welcomed and loved by the elves as if they are excited that a human being has arrived. They can be humorous, reassuring, and even nurturing. Others, however, report something very different, feeling mocked, overwhelmed, and even terrified. The entities do not always behave like friendly guides. Some people come back from these encounters with lasting clarity or healing, while others return shaken and unable to interpret what the hell just happened. Researchers studying psychedelic therapy acknowledge that encounters with entities, whatever their nature, can affect people long after the drug has worn off. In online psychedelic communities, interpretations vary wildly. Some people believe the machine elves are literal conscious beings existing in another dimension that DMT allows humans to access temporarily. Others read them through a psychological lens, linking them to the ideas of Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist who developed analytical psychology and wrote extensively about archetypes, the collective unconscious, and demons. From a Jungian perspective, machine elves might be archetypal, trickster spirits, or personifications of creative intelligence. Meanwhile, more religious communities draw on their own traditions. Some conservative Christian or Orthodox groups describe the beings people see on DMT as purely demonic and deceptive entities, warning that exploring altered states without spiritual protection can be dangerous. These interpretations echo older religious teachings that warn against visions outside of sanctioned practice. Scientific explanations take yet another route. Neuroscientists focus on what DMT does to the brain's serotonin system, especially in areas tied to vision, imagination, and the sense of presence. When these circuits are disrupted, the boundary between self and other can collapse, making it easy for the brain to interpret its own internal activity as an external being. Predictive processing theorists argue that the brain constantly constructs models of the world, and under the chaos of DMT, those models break down and reorganize, producing vivid hallucinated agents, beings made from the brain's tendency to seek out intelligence, communication, and faces. But even these scientific explanations run into an issue, and that's the consistency. Machine elves show up way too often, described way too similarly by people who have never even met each other or heard of Terence McKenna's work. This suggests that while culture influences the shape of the story, there may be something deeper in human cognition, or something deeper in reality being tapped into. Personally, I always think about how we only see less than 1% of what is actually there. Specifically, 3,500 of just 1% of the electromagnetic spectrum is what us humans can naturally perceive. Our brains filter out more than most of reality, so we can function without being overwhelmed. We don't see 99% of reality. For example, let's consider plant blindness. Plants make up 82.4% of the world's biomass, meaning they are everywhere and they are always communicating. But our ears tune them out. They say there was a time when we could perceive them, but humans have seemingly devolved instead of evolved in the areas that matter most. You can see this in the world's indigenous peoples who remain untouched by colonization. They hold animistic beliefs for a reason. They are still far more tapped into nature than the rest of us so-called civilized folks. We only hear, see, and think of what is useful, or rather what we consider useful in this day and age. Psychedelic chemicals like DMT turn those filters off. So instead of seeing the edited version of reality, we begin to experience the raw feed. Textures, patterns, colors, emotions, memories, and sounds all at once. Normally, vision only speaks to vision, hearing only speaks to hearing, and touch only speaks to touch. Under these conditions, everything begins communicating with everything else, creating synesthesia, geometric patterns, breathing walls, moving shadows, fractals, and encounters with spiritual beings. In that state, we are truly conscious and perceptive. Our default mode programming, that part of the mind that maintains self, time, boundaries, identity, past and future, me versus not me, it all shuts down. And when it does, we become one with everything. The sense of self dissolves, thoughts align with the cosmos, and our essence detaches from our bodies. The real us, the energy that dwells within and moves these meat suits through the world, rises to the surface. These entities are always around us, however. I always think about how people go crazy from a quote-unquote bad trip, and they are just stuck in this perpetual, unfiltered, raw world when they were simply looking for a good time. Their mind, body, and soul, it was not ready for that. There was no conditioning or discipline or preparation, and I can only imagine the overstimulation, the fear, even the fleeting beauty and freedom, all of it swallowed in the end by the hell they now inhabit.
navigated through the sands as easily as fish through water and humans through air. Long before the Olympian gods took their familiar shapes in the minds of poets, before temples rose in marble and hymns fixed names into stone, the world was full of peoples now forgotten, tribes that lived between forests and river deltas in places where the earth was still damp with creation. Among these was a diminutive nation the Greeks called the Pygmies. Small in stature but fierce in spirit, skilled hunters, clever builders, devoted to their customs and proud of their queen. Her name was Joanna. She was not small like her people. According to the ancient storytellers, Joanna was of ordinary human height, or perhaps even taller, and her beauty was the sort that unsettled the heart. Her hair hung in long black waves. Her skin glowed like polished bronze. Her presence alone quieted entire gatherings. She became queen not only because the male line had withered, as Elian describes, but because the people believed the gods themselves had blessed her birth. They adored her, and adoration is a dangerous thing, especially when the gods listen. Joanna's reign ushered in a rare peace. The pygmy hunters returned with overflowing baskets. Birds migrated in gentler paths overhead. The rivers brought fish in such abundance that they glimmered like liquid silver. Some claim that wherever Joanna walked, flowers pushed up through the soil as if eager to touch her feet. Over time, admiration grew into worship. It began with harmless gestures, women leaving wreaths at her doorstep, children touching her hem for luck. But soon, her people began to speak of her beauty as though it exceeded that of the goddesses themselves. Hera, Athena, Artemis, Aphrodite. People whispered that Joanna surpassed them all. Joanna herself never denied the comparisons. Worse, she began to believe them. Hera hears everything, every boast, every misplaced praise, every mortal whisper that dares compare flesh to divinity. One evening, the queen of the gods looked down from Olympus and saw a gathering of pygmies dancing beneath torchlight. She saw the wreaths laid before Joanna. She heard the chants, the songs proclaiming their queen, the most radiant among all women, mortal or divine. Hera's jealousy was not mindless. It was cold, ancient, purposeful, a primal defense of the celestial order. She had spent eternity punishing rivals, lovers, children, enemies, and innocents alike, all because her pride was older than humanity itself. In Joanna's rising glory, she saw a threat. The moment Hera descended upon the village was said to be marked by a sudden silence, the kind that falls before a storm. The pygmies slept. Joanna stood alone outside her dwelling, staring at her reflection in a bowl of dark water. A wind rose. The torches went out. A shadow appeared beside her, tall, crowned, shimmering with the cold authority of a goddess.
"Do you truly believe yourself more beautiful than the daughters of heaven?" Hera asked.
Joanna trembled but held her chin high. "I am as they say I am." Hera's eyes blazed.
"Then let beauty be taken from you."
In an instant, Joanna's body contorted. Her arms fused into wings. Her voice shrank into a harsh croak. Feathers erupted from her skin. Her face lengthened into a long curved beak. Her legs thinned into spindly stalks. She became a crane, gangly, awkward, stripped of every trace of the loveliness she once treasured. Hera's curse was not merely physical, it was emotional, maternal, personal.
"You will long for your child, but he will fear you. You will hunger for your people, but they will see only a monster. You will remember yourself, but no one else will.
And then she was gone. At dawn, the pygmies awoke to screams. Their queen was missing. Her infant son cried endlessly, inconsolable. Then the cranes came. Not ordinary cranes, but an enormous flock, descending with fury, aggression, and unnatural coordination. For the first time in their history, the pygmies were overwhelmed by birds whose pecks could kill and whose wings beat with the force of a storm. At the head of the flock was a single crane, larger than the rest, circling above the village with a mournful cry. When she descended among the huts, the pygmies shot arrows, threw stones, and beat at her with spears. She fled, but not before stretching her neck toward the home where her child slept. Her child screamed in terror. Elian says that this longing to see her son, to be recognized, to be loved, was the cruelest part of the curse. Joranna remembered everything, but the world remembered nothing of her except the enemy she had become. From that day on, cranes and pygmies were locked into perpetual conflict. Spring migrations brought battles.
When you really think about it, the only explanation that makes sense for why gods, spirits, and supernatural beings would ever feel threatened by a human is that these entities are egregores, beings whose strength is directly tied to belief, attention, and emotional energy. If a divine being truly possessed limitless power, what harm could a single mortal's beauty, confidence, and adoration possibly pose? Yet again and again, in mythology, we see goddesses lashing out at human women, punishing them not because they were dangerous in any physical way, but because their presence pulled worship, admiration, and energy away from the deity. It is the same reason celebrities today are called idols, and why the more people talk about someone, the more power they seem to accumulate, whether it's good or bad. It's kind of like impressions on social media. It doesn't matter if you comment something negative or positive under somebody's YouTube video. It's all impressions, and it is all currency. Attention is currency on both spiritual and earthly planes. Kind of like how bad press is still press. As long as they're talking about you, you're still relevant. The problem comes when they stop talking about you. This is why Hera lashed out at Joranna and why Athena cursed Medusa. Medusa was said to be so breathtakingly beautiful that men left temples praising her instead of the goddess, drawing divine rage upon her. It was not the human woman that threatened the god. It was the shift in devotion and attention and energy. Like in American Gods, the series, beings that rely on human belief cannot tolerate competition because worship shapes their reality too. In that sense, these mythic punishments read less like divine justice and more like jealous egregores maintaining their power or trying to, revealing that even gods fear being forgotten. Remember, even in the Bible, Exodus 20 verses 3-5, King James Version, "Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them, nor serve them. For I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generation of them that hate me." This verse applies to what I just said. And also, if you haven't noticed, it doesn't say that there aren't any other type of gods out there, just that don't put them before him. Don't worship them at all. And also, notice the part about "or that is in the earth beneath," which ties us back to our little people here, pygmies, who are said to move through the sands as easily as fish through water and humans through air. Across the imagination of the Mediterranean world, few beings capture the human subconscious like the pygmies, the little people of Greek tradition whose stories threaded themselves through epic poetry, philosophy, medieval theology, ethnography, and art. Their very name came from the word pygmi, high, a measurement from the elbow to the knuckles, indicating a stature scarcely more than 2 feet tall. The pygmies are not metaphors. They were treated as a real race of diminutive humans living at the far edges of the known world, inhabiting the thresholds between mythical geography and historical memory. Hesiod, one of Greece's earliest poets, offered one of the most revealing genealogies. He wrote that Epaphus, the son of Zeus, and the Argive princess Io was ancestor to the dark Libyans and high-souled Ethiopians and the underground folk and feeble pygmies. This list is not random. Io herself, transformed by Hera and wandering across continents, became the ancestral mother of many heroes: Perseus, Cadmus, Heraclius, Minos, Lynceus, Cepheus, and Danis. I have an entire deep dive connecting these figures to biblical characters and historical people of Kemet, because Greek mythology is, as many of you already know, practically a copy and paste of Kemetic creation cycles and divine genealogies. But for now, let us stay with Hesiod's thread: the dark Libyans, the noble Ethiopians, the underground folk, and the pygmies. These names open a doorway into a worldview where small beings lived beside rivers and forests, where gods bred with mortals, and where the southern lands were so ancient that their inhabitants blurred the lines between the human, the divine, and the subterranean. Allow me to explain. To the Greeks, the pygmies were a real ethnic group living along the Upper Nile, south of Egypt, past the cultivated lands in the deep equatorial forests, lands that Europeans would call Ethiopia or Abyssinia. The word abyss evoked deep waters, chaos, and the underworld. So this land was also known as the land of the abyss, hence the name Abyssinia. It was the same vocabulary later applied to Enki, whose domains included the deep waters of the Abzu and the fertile underworld where life gestates. When I say underworld, I want you to think of a literal world below our feet, the earth being comprised of surface dwellers and under the surface dwellings, both worlds with civilized and uncivilized parts, waters that exist above, and even more so, waters that exist below. This was Enki's territory, and why, when you read of the Tuatha De Danann, it tells they split the lands into two, humans topside with the Tuatha on the underside. Enki in general is associated with the southern regions of the earth and all of its definitions, meaning the deep waters south of the surface, meaning below the surface, the southern stars, the southern lands. Enki in Abrahamic faiths is both Jesus and Satan. Enki's land domain was ancient Ethiopia, which was basically the majority of Africa, with the exception of parts of northern Africa. These northern parts were called Kemet, and everything west of Kemet that was not Ethiopia and was northern Africa was called Libya. The lands south of Egypt were labeled as the devil's country, the deep, the savage place, and the land of demons. You can actually go back and look at old maps and see where they cut the maps off right at the edges of northern Africa, or what they consider northern Africa today. And you see these labels saying devil's country, land of the savages, where the demons reside, stuff like that. They looked south and projected hell, ancient lands filled with some of the oldest human lineages on the planet. Because as you all know, listening to this, the pygmies are an actual ethnic group of people. They're not myth, and there's no question that they exist. So the dark Libyans were traced to Phut, the son of Ham. The Ethiopians were traced to Cush, also son of Ham. In many ancient traditions, Ham's descendants continued interbreeded with fallen angels after the flood, giving rise to hybridized bloodlines, neither fully human nor fully divine. These lineages sat at the margins of scripture not because they were unimportant, but because they were too destabilizing. Beneath later retellings lay an older narrative, the mingling of mortals with celestial beings, as we just heard in the story about Zeus and Io, and where the pygmies came from, echoing the birth of semi-divine heroes and the ultimate condemnation of those hybrid offspring in texts like the Book of Giants. According to that tradition, the offspring of human woman and heavenly beings were doomed upon death to become earthbound spirits, which we now call demons in Abrahamic religions, while their divine fathers returned to the heavens. Encoded within these lineages were subterranean beings, underground folk, hybrid bloodlines, and people of unusual stature. Giants, and little people. So this includes the pygmies that are being discussed here in Greek imagination, which is a group that existed before, during, and after the flood. Aristotle insisted the pygmies were real. In History of Animals, he wrote that cranes migrating from the steppes of Scythia and eastern Iran flew to marshlands south of Egypt, where they indeed battled a race of dwarfish men living in caves and underground chambers. Their horses were proportionately small, and their lifestyle matched centuries of oral tradition. To modern readers, a war between small humans and cranes seems humorous, but cranes reach 3 to 4 feet tall, towering over a race of humans no more than 2 feet in height. Is nothing and feasible. A flock of these things could definitely slaughter an entire settlement of little people. Aristotle's matter-of-fact tone suggests that for him, small-statured humans in Africa were real and not something of mythical nature. Now let's take this a step further, like y'all know I like to do. The Khoisan are the oldest humans alive genetically. They carry a divergence between 160,000 and 250,000 years, making them the root of the human genetic tree. As it stands today, they have the oldest human DNA of everybody in the world. They possess ancient serpent-like phenotypes and compact statures that mirror descriptions of Enki himself. He was said to have a serpent-like phenotype. That's why when he approached Eve in the Garden of Eden, they say a snake, because he appeared as a reptilian humanoid, a serpent humanoid, which is sometimes when you see depictions of the snake in the Garden of Eden standing before Adam and Eve, there's like a little merman in the tree who was depicted as a merman, Enki. And mermen and merfolk in general throughout Africa and Asia are half human, half snake, or 100% serpent, 100% human. And this goes hand in hand with also being half fish, in the sense that sometimes they are depicted half fish, half human, or 100% of fish, 100% of human. It is why the symbol of Jesus is the ichthys fish symbol, and why, if you notice, Jesus performed a lot of water and fish-based miracles. Remember, merfolk are of the abyss, the deep waters, and Enki is the prince of the underworld. But this is also why, if you notice, the Khoisan have these same phenotypes, and the Khoisan are from the region we talked about earlier called Abyssinia, also known as ancient Ethiopia, which was Enki's land domain, which makes sense that he is the creator of humans and why scientifically the oldest DNA sprouts right up out of Africa, specifically from Ethiopia, Abyssinia, Enki's land. The Pygmy peoples are the second oldest human lineage, averaging around 4 feet in height and carrying archaic markers that reach tens of thousands of years into the past. Their unique genetic signatures diverge 60 to 100,000 years ago, placing them near the dawn of Homo sapiens. Both groups originate in the lands Europeans once called Ethiopia and Abyssinia, the very lands they called the abyss, the underworld, hell. Their migrations tell the rest of the story, however. For tens of thousands of years, both the Khoisan and the Pygmy peoples traveled outward from Africa into India, Malaysia, the Philippines, Papua, Micronesia, Melanesia, Polynesia, Australia, and Southern Asia. These are the exact regions where global little people traditions are the strongest. When we put the pieces together, a single pattern emerges. The Khoisan, the oldest humans, small-bodied, serpent-featured like Enki, originating out of ancient Abyssinia and carrying the deepest genetic history. Then there's the Pygmies, the second oldest, 4 feet tall, forest-dwelling, archaic lineage. Their shared migrations out of Africa into Asia and Oceania and Southeast Asia and Australasia is proof scientifically, mythically, and it's obvious by the appearance of those of the two groups' diasporas. It is even evident they mixed in various Asiatic populations based on stature and phenotypes. Think about the stereotype of how Asians look. More so, East Asians, east of the Himalayas, who have a specific phenotype that is completely polarized to those west of the Himalayas. And East Asians also have a serpent worshipping type culture, whereas West Asians have a serpent demonizing culture. There are even groups like the Naga people who tell of descending from the Nagas, who are serpent deities. Think about it, and then think about how I just described these people, and if you dare, go look them up to see how they look. and you will see exactly what I mean. And these are also global hotspots of little people lore, the places just named throughout Asia, which lines up exactly with these same migration corridors, scientifically and mythically. The pattern is impossible to dismiss. On Flores lived Homo floresiensis, a real tiny human-like species 3.5 feet tall, living until 50,000 years ago. On Luzon lived Homo luzonensis, another small-bodied hominin, surviving within the same time frame. These beings overlap with Homo sapiens long enough to form memory, not written memory, but oral, ancestral, mythic memory. In Flores, the Ebu Gogo stories match the fossils with uncanny precision. The same global pattern appears in stories of the Aziza, Abatwa, Menahun Duendes, Yunwi Sunzdi, and countless others. Myth speaks of underground dwellers, cave people, mountain guardians, tiny forest hunters, watchers who punish disrespect, and beings who vanish into cracks in the earth. Genetics speaks of ancient divergences measured in hundreds of thousands of years. Archaeology speaks of real small-bodied humans whose existence overlapped ours. Folklore across the world repeats the same descriptions and places shaped by Khoisan and Pygmy migrations. Myth and history converges. Perhaps the Pygmy and Khoisan peoples of today carry echoes of a lineage that stretches back before myths were written, before continents shifted, before lost lands like Kumari Kandam, Atlantis, Lemuria, and Mu sank into the sea, when their ancestors traversed easily throughout the earth that is now 70% water before continents sunk. Perhaps humanity truly once walked beside little people, mortal, divine, subterranean, and ancestral, all living in that deep and mysterious age when gods touched the earth and the world was far stranger than our rewritten histories admit. Meaning there was a time when little people were prevalent in this world. Now let's take it a step further before we move on. Long before humans walked the earth, the ancient tablets describe a world governed by two hierarchies, the ruling Anunnaki and the laboring Ajiji. The Ajiji were either the children of Enlil or a lesser species of the Anunnaki, depending on the text. But every tradition agrees that they bore the full weight of divine work. They cultivated the earth, cleared land, and dug vast irrigation canals across continents. They laid the first infrastructure of the planet itself. Their contract to labor lasted either 3,600 years or 36,000 years. The manuscripts are unclear, but both numbers are immense because both numbers vastly surpass the time that they agreed to work. They worked day and night without relief, shaping landscapes from Mesopotamia to distant corners of the world. Their work was not localized. The tablets describe a global workforce spread across mountains, valleys, islands, and underground passages. These world-spanning duties echo something humanity remembers far longer than written records, because across nearly every continent, cultures tell of stories of little people who live underground, inside mountains, in caves, forests, and hidden places. The Abattoir of South Africa, the Aziza of Benin, the Menehune of Hawaii, the Ursinart of Alaska, the Yanwe Tsutsuni of the Cherokee, the Duende of Latin America, and the Ibu Gogo of Indonesia. These beings are described as tiny, elusive, quick-moving, cave-dwelling, often hairy, often territorial, sometimes benevolent, sometimes hostile, always protecting nature. This global pattern is not coincidence. The worldwide little people archetype mirrors the Ajiji almost exactly. Small, subterranean, intelligent, protective of the land, swift, and deeply tied to Earth's natural balance. Archaeology strengthens the connection. As I was just talking about Homo florensis, a real tiny human species only 3.5 feet tall, aligns perfectly with Ibu Gogo stories on Flores, Indonesia. The bones match the folklore down to the physical features and behaviors. These people were not simply telling stories. But that's the funny part. They always find out these people are right, and then all of a sudden they want to act like they always believe these people, and they want to come in and do more research and dig more stuff. It's always trouble. But anyway, Africa's genetic history deepens the pattern in a way that is impossible to ignore. As I was talking about the Khoisan and the Pygmy people before, these convergences matter because they show that the image of small humans is not foreign to the human story or Earth's story. Humans are old enough genetically and culturally to have lived alongside other small body hominins and to transmit memories of them through myth, what has become myth rather. But the most striking connection is behavioral. Like the Ijiji, the global little people guard natural places. Like the Ijiji, they retaliate when humans violate sacred boundaries. Like the Ijiji, they vanish into earth, rock, trees, and water. Like the Ijiji, they move quickly, silently, and often at night. Like the Ijiji, they live underground or in secret places. And like the Ijiji, they are masters of hidden knowledge. This strongly suggests that the little people are either the Ijiji themselves, descendants of the Ijiji, and or descendants of the Ijiji who have interbred with now extinct hominin species and beings of myth. So according to the Sumerian tablets, the Ijiji revolted after thousands of years of hard labor. Under the leadership of Geshtu-E, who was an Anuna overseer who sympathized with them, they threw their tools into fire, shouted war cries, went on strike, and marched toward Enlil's mountain palace. Enlil lived atop the Akur, which is the cosmic mountain of the world, a place later married as Mount Olympus in Greek mythology, the four mythical islands in Gallic lore where Black Rock lies in the middle of, Mount Meru or Sumeru in Hinduism, Jainism, and Buddhism, which consists of 5 mountain peaks. So in their cosmology, it includes the 4 islands of Gallic lore and Black Rock. It's considered the Garden of Eden or the Mountain of God in some Christian scholarly opinion, and Axis Mundi in Greco-Roman astronomy. Enlil's Sumerian title was Satan, meaning great administrator, a term that evolved through language into the word Satan, not as the embodiment of evil at first, but as the title for the chief earthly ruler of the divine hierarchy, the King of Kings and the God of Gods, Prince of the Earth, Lord of the weather and storms. Enlil. Enki intervened to prevent Enlil from straight up slaughtering the Ijiji. He wanted to just massacre them all, genocide. Enki's solution was to create humans to share the Ijiji's workload, not as slaves but as co-workers. This was expressed to Enlil. Obviously, the deal was broken along the way because humans had to be liberated by Enki. This was how the original Garden of Eden story went. After thousands of years of liberation, Enlil got tired of us free humans and tried to wipe us off the face of the planet, literally, via the Great World Flood. His solution was always genocide, obviously. Look at what he told the Hebrews to do to the Canaanites. Genocide. Look at Palestine today. So yeah, the story tracks. As far as the canals the Ijiji dug and the abrupt end of their digging, this abrupt quitting is evident in places such as the Okavango Delta of Botswana, which is the actual remnants of the canals that the Ijiji channeled in the lands of the Abzu. These canals remain to this day with their ancient contours gouged into the earth as visible evidence of what occurred there. This land still holds the most striking physical evidence of Ijiji engineering. The Okavango Delta in Botswana contains vast canal-like formations carved with geometric precision. They fork and branch like irrigation grids, and they all end abruptly at the edge of what was once a gigantic inland sea. The abrupt endings match the moment in the tablets when the Ijiji abandoned their work and revolted. These canals could have supported crops to feed millions and possibly billions of Ijiji and then later human workers. This delta contains over 150,000 islands, more than 260,000 mammals, and over 400 bird species. One of Earth's richest ecosystems shaped by ancient labor. This is also where the memory of small subterranean beings resurfaces in Renaissance Europe. Paracelsus is an early 1500s physician, alchemist, occult philosopher, and founder of toxicology, as well as one of the first thinkers to propose psychological origins of disease, and he wrote extensively on elemental beings. In his book on nymphs, sylphs, pygmies, and salamanders, he described the gnomes, and he said that the earth is filled almost to the center with gnomes or fairies, which are small people of stature. They are guardians of treasures, mines, and precious stones. He said that they are ingenious, friends to men, and easy to command, and that they ask no reward but the glory of being commanded, that their wives, called the nomise, are little but very handsome and marvelously adorned. Paracelsus was not inventing fantasies. He was recording a European memory of the same archetype preserved worldwide, and that is these little people. When archaeology, genetics, mythology, and ancient texts are placed together, a consistent picture forms. The Ijiji were not only divine laborers of Sumer, but the original template behind the global archetype of the little people. Their presence across cultures is not mere coincidence. No, this is continuity. They say the first steps on Madagascar belonged to the Vazimba, a people small in stature who slipped ashore from far islands to the east and vanished into forests, rivers, and caves until they were remembered as both ancestors and apparitions. In one strand of memory, they were early settlers who helped lay the foundations of Malagasy culture. In another, they were something stranger, a frontier race whose presence still haunts boulders and gorges and the dark bends of water. Across the Indian Ocean, seafarers from Southeast Asian islands rode monsoon winds and star paths to Madagascar. Linguistics and genetics both point to ancestors from Borneo and surrounding islands arriving roughly 500 to 700 BC. These settlers then mixed with Africans from the mainland to become the Malagasy. Some have wondered whether the very earliest of these voyagers are those later remembered as the Vazimba, while others caution that the pygmy hypothesis is unproven. The language on the island itself is Austronesian at its core, and genetic studies trace a dual heritage that fits the story of ocean crossings and later fusions. But as we all know, many things can be true at one time. Oral tradition paints the Vazimba as smaller than other folk, sometimes very dark, sometimes pale, living near watercourses or in the deep woods. When people tell the more uncanny stories, the Vazimba speak in a warped cadence and their faces lengthen, their lips drawing back to show hidden, fang-like teeth. In popular belief, they are not often fully human, but dangerous presences that cling to places rather than bloodlines, guardians and malefactors tied to rocks, cataracts, and sudden pools. Their dead, it is said, were put into chosen waters, bogs, and quiet reaches of rivers received the bodies, and those sites became sacred ground. Even now, some communities treat such places as pilgrimage stations, where offerings are made to keep the old powers in balance. In regions where ancient earth and mounds rise, people may call them Vazimba tombs and approach with sacrifice and prayer to win favor or avert harm. Around these places, a web of fadi still binds conduct. Fadi is the Madagascar word for sacred taboos or prohibitions, rules that dictate what must not be done in certain places or times to avoid angering spirits. One example, salt that once touched a vessel is not to be brought into a Vazimba precinct. Garlic and pork are kept away from tomb areas that belong to them. Fadi is woven into Malagasy life, guarding people, landscapes, and the dead. There are other short-statured peoples on Madagascar today who are very much real, living human communities. Some elders say they inherited language and life ways from the Vazimba. The Makia and the Biozi, forest and savanna foragers, have long been described as darker and smaller than neighboring farmers. Their speech is Malagasy, yet researchers have documented unusual words and phrases that do not match Bantu or standard Austronesian vocabulary. They say there's a hint of something much older in regard to language beneath the surface of it all. The Vazimba story also runs through the making of the highland kingdoms, especially those of the Merina people, the largest ethnic group in the country today, who live in the central highlands. According to Merina oral tradition, parts of their earliest royal bloodlines were tied to the Vazimba, suggesting intermarriage or ancient alliances between these mysterious forest dwellers and the ancestors of the Merina state. As the highland kingdom slowly formed, a long sequence of Merina kings undertook military campaigns that pushed Vazimba communities farther to the west. These kings ruled over the central plateau of Madagascar, a vast elevated region known for its terraced rice fields and clustered hilltop villages. The first of these rulers was Andry Amanello, a legendary king said to have lived in the 16th century. He is remembered as the one who began the wars against the Vazimba, especially in the central highlands around the region of Amarina, the homeland of the Merina people. His campaigns were continued by his son, Ralambo, another important Merina king credited with expanding Merina political power, shaping the social structure of the kingdom, and introducing certain royal rituals that still shape Malagasy culture today. After Ralambo came his son, Andrian Junca, perhaps the most influential of the early Marina rulers. Andrian Junca marched even further into Vizimba territory and is said to have seized the hill called Analamanga, which is a high ridge that dominates the surrounding landscape. At the top of this ridge, Andrian Junca ordered the construction of a rova, which is a fortified royal compound unique to Madagascar. A rova was not simply a palace. It was a sacred political and spiritual center containing royal tombs, ritual spaces, defensive walls, and ancestral shrines. Building a rova on a conquered Vizimba hill symbolized both military victory and the spiritual claiming of the land. Around this rova grew a settlement that would become Antananarivo, now the capital city of Madagascar. Its name meaning City of the Thousand, referring to the 1,000 soldiers Andrian Junca stationed there to guard the new stronghold and protect his expanding kingdom. As the Marina Kingdom grew in power over the following centuries, old Vizimba territories were absorbed into Marina political and ritual life. Sacred Vizimba groves, caves, streams, and burial places were folded into royal geography. Some became sites of ancestor veneration. Others were reinterpreted through Marina cosmology. Yet, despite conquest, the name Vizimba never vanished from the highlands. It continued to appear in place names, family genealogies, legends, and ritual practices, suggesting that the memory of Madagascar's first little people was way too deeply rooted in the land to ever erase. In the forest, other stories linger. In the north and west, people speak of the Kalanoro, small, hairy, red-eyed beings who can live in caves, marshes, and rain-drenched thickets. Their feet point backward, their voices whine, and dogs fear them. Some steal food, some steal children, some are strangely loyal to those that treat them with respect, and some are only seen in the river, light of the rainy season. For certain storytellers, the Kalanoro are kin to the Vizimba, or perhaps their ghosts. And the lakes and sinkholes said to hold Vizimba burials are the very waters where Kalanoro play. The tale shifts with the speaker, but the terrain is always the same. Water, stone, shadow, and a presence that is not quite human. Even the most sober accounts keep their footing in the old earth. They tell how the earliest settlers practiced tavi, clever slash and burn agriculture for banana, tubers, and ginger. Tavi is the Malagasy method of clearing and burning forest patches to plant crops, especially rice and bananas, a practice central to early survival. Some Vizimba lived by water, while others ranged the uplands. They stress that metallurgy and irrigated rice came later. They remind us that in other Austronesian worlds, there are cousins to this legend, little folk like Hawaii's Menehune who echo across seas and centuries. The Malagasy version is rooted in the hills and swamps of Amarina and Bamaraha, in royal capitals and sharp Singi stone. Singi refers to jagged limestone formations, a forest of stone spires unique to Madagascar. These stories live on in tombs and waterlogged graves, in the names of places and the prohibitions that still fence them. In popular belief, the Vizimba are often not human at all, but demigods or malevolent spirits, bound to certain rocks and waters. Their burial places are sacred, their taboos exact. They are said to have detested the touch of salt and to forbid garlic or pork near their tombs. And in the deepest night of the story, when they transform, their speech twists and their faces lengthen to show fangs. The island remembers them in rivers that do not forget, in stones that still take offerings, and in the quiet rules that tell you how to pass through without offense. In Central Africa, the Mbuti and Aka forest peoples speak of small beings known as Ife or Toroso, ancient forest dwellers who live deep inside the Congo basin. Their bodies are child-sized, but their speed and awareness belong to something far older. One hunter told of waking to find tiny footprints circling the ashes of his fire. When he followed them into the trees, the forest turned so silent it felt like it had swallowed sound itself. Laughter echoed above him, though the branches never stirred. Later, when he bent to retrieve his arrows, he found them tied together with vines in a perfect, intricate knot. That night, his shelter filled with tapping noises that crawled along the beams in deliberate patterns. The elders said he had wandered into the territory of the Ife, and that they had chosen to warn him rather than claim Southward in the Kalahari, the Khoisan tell stories of little desert beings, sometimes called the abattoirs, tiny hunter spirits who live beneath the sand. They are said to be so small, they ride atop ants, but their voices carry the cunning and danger of seasoned warriors. Travelers describe hearing a child crying in the dunes, only for the sound to shift behind them as they move. One man followed the cry, thinking a lost child needed help.
Who's there?
As night fell, he felt vibrations underneath his feet, as though dozens of small bodies were moving just beneath the surface, circling him. He climbed a thorn tree and spent the night listening to soft footsteps pacing below. At dawn, the sand around the tree was covered in deep oval footprints, too small for a child and too heavy for anything of that size. Across southern Africa, especially in South Africa, Eswatini, Botswana, and parts of Zimbabwe, one of the oldest and most enduring Little People traditions continue to be spoken with absolute seriousness, and that's the abattoir. These beings appear in Zulu, Swazi, Ndebele, and Tsonga oral histories as an ancient race of extremely small humans, often described as so tiny that an adult could sit comfortably on the back of a gazelle or antelope without being noticed. Others say they are small enough to hide behind a single blade of grass or inside the hollow of a beetle-bored hole in a tree trunk. Their world is the bushveld, the thorn forests, the dry riverbeds, the rocky plateaus, and the tall golden grasses of the African interior, the oldest landscapes humanity ever walked. The abattoir also appear in the traditions of the San, one of the oldest human lineages on Earth. While the San form part of the broader Khoisan language family we talked about earlier, they are a distinct people with their own deep cultural memory, and their description of the abattoir is even more extreme. San elders say the abattoir can be the size of insects, riding ants like horses, slipping between grains of sand, and moving beneath the soil in quick, whispering patterns. This is not spoken metaphorically, but literally, an assertion of how ancient and elusive these beings are. Different skills reflect different types of encounters. Bantu-speaking peoples met the abattoir in the open grasslands as tiny but visible hunters. San hunters, who tracked by micro movement and sound, encountered smaller, quieter, more camouflaged beings who moved like the sands itself. All traditions agree on one point. The abattoir are not spirit illusions, they are real people. People who simply live at a scale and in a manner that prevents casual human perception. Descriptions of the abattoir are remarkably consistent amongst ethnic groups. They are said to be extremely small-bodied, ranging from the height of an infant to the size of a grown man's hand, while some are the size of insects. Dark-skinned, blending perfectly with earth, bark, and shadow. Slender and agile, capable of sprinting between grass stalks and vanishing into cracks in stone. Sharp-eyed and sharp-eared, hearing whispers across long distances and seeing motion before animals do. Remarkably stealthy, leaving no footprints unless they intend to. Master hunters, using arrows made from grass shafts and tips carved from thorns or sharpened twigs. Communal, living in small bands with strict rules of territory and respect. Quick to take offense, especially if mocked for their size, which is considered a grave insult. And guardians of specific natural places, especially hidden springs, tall grass valleys, termite mounds, and isolated kopjes, or rocky hills. What makes the abattoir formidable is not their physical appearance but their behavior. They are extraordinarily sensitive to how humans treat the land. Hunters entering tall grass were traditionally taught to speak aloud so the abattoir could hear them coming, not because the abattoir fear humans, but because stepping on an abattoir's shelter or path invites retaliation. Disrespect is the one unforgivable sin to them. Arrogance, loudness, mockery, cutting through sacred grasslands, or hunting carelessly are all said to provoke swift and unmistakable punishment. The abattoir do not attack with overwhelming force. They strike with precision. A man may suddenly feel a sting in his ankle. A woman may hear a cutting insult whispered behind her heel. A hunter may return home with an unexplained fever after ignoring a warning. Abattoir encounters follow consistent patterns across these cultures. One well-known story tells of a traveler resting beneath a tall acacia tree. As he sat, he felt eyes upon him. Looking down, he saw a ring of abattoir hunters standing at his feet, weapons raised, demanding to know why he walked their land without properly greeting them. When he apologized and praised their skill, they vanished as silently as they came, letting him continue unharmed. But in other tales, when a traveler mocks their size or expresses disbelief, the abattoir respond with ferocity, shooting tiny arrows tipped with venom made from insects and plants humans do not know how to harvest. Another set of traditions linked the abattoir to pregnancy. Pregnant women were warned not to walk alone in the grasslands. The abattoir, drawn to expectant mothers, might approach to ask about the child's sex. If answered kindly, they bless the child. If ignored, they bring misfortune. In this, the abattoir echo a larger African belief that the smallest beings often hold the greatest spiritual authority. The abattoir also occupy an important place in San cosmology. The oldest rock paintings in the Drakensberg and Kalahari depict small human-like figures with bows, dancing or hunting in groups. San elders say that these are the first people, small-bodied beings who shared the land with early humans and taught humans how to track, how to hunt, and how to speak respectfully to animals. The abattoir in this worldview are not extinct, not in the slightest. They simply moved deeper into the tall grasses and hidden valleys as the world grew louder and humans forgot how to see what moves beneath the surface. Descriptions from these oral traditions emphasize that the abattoir still exists in present day. In KwaZulu-Natal, Eswatini, and rural parts of Limpopo, elders insist there are areas where the abattoir listen, places one must not enter carelessly, places where silence is required, places where you leave an offering, a pinch of food, a word of greeting, not from superstition, but respect. Farmers tell stories of losing cattle near abattoir territories. Hunters speak of soft voices warning them to turn back. Children hear footsteps that make no footprints. In each case, the interpretation is the same. The abattoir are doing what they have always done, watching, guarding, enforcing the old laws of the land. Power is not measured by size. In East Africa, along the mist-covered slopes of Mount Kilimanjaro, the Shaga people speak of the Majini Wadago, the little mountain spirits who dwell in caves cut into the volcanic rock. They are slender, dark-skinned, and silent, watching from high ledges and narrow cracks. A herder searching for a lost calf once heard stones shifting behind him in the fog. When he turned, he glimpsed a small figure darting into a cave opening impossible for a human to enter. That night, he found his calf tied to a tree with braids of mountain grass, woven tightly enough to cut into the bark. The elders told him the Majini Wadogo had returned what was theirs, but not without taking a night of his memory in exchange. To the Shaga, the Majini Wadago are not symbolic. They are a part of the mountain itself, guardians of the forest paths, the mists, the stones, and the hidden things that humans do not fully see. Descriptions of the Majini Wadago are remarkably consistent. They are slender, dark-skinned, long-limbed, and no taller than a small child. Their skin is said to resemble wet volcanic stone, blending seamlessly into the mountain. Their eyes are reflective and wide, catching light like obsidian. They move without sound, sometimes appearing to glide rather than walk, slipping into crevices no human body could enter. Shaga elders say that if you see one head on, it means you were already being watched for a long time. Their homes are the narrow, twisting volcanic caves high on the mountain, caverns formed by ancient lava flows that are unreachable for most people. These caves are considered forbidden to humans. According to Shaga cosmology, the Majini Wadogo emerged from these mountain tunnels long before villages were built on the slopes. They were here before the herds, before the banana groves, before the terraced farms. They belong to the mountain's original order. What makes the Majini Wadogo unique among Africa's little people traditions is their most feared ability. They can take memory. This is an ability widely acknowledged in Shaga lore, and it is not metaphorical. The elders say the Majini Wadogo drink thoughts, take nights, or close the mind's path. Those who encountered them often returned home missing hours of time, unable to recount how they traveled back, or remembering the forest only in fragments. Memory loss is considered a sign of an encounter, just as much as finding woven grass cords or hearing whispered voices from the trees. Across the forests of southern Ghana, where the canopy forms a living roof of green and the air hangs heavy with the smell of kola, earth, and rain, the Akan and Ashanti people speak of a race of forest dwarves known as the Moesha. Their name means the little ones or the bush children, but nothing about them is childlike in the innocent sense. They are the ancient guardians of sacred groves, the watchers of forbidden trees, the unseen custodians of the deep forest. Elders describe them as small, muscular beings no taller than the height of a child, with the skin color of red clay or dark earth. Their most striking feature is their feet. They face backward. To trace a Moesha is to be led in the wrong direction every time, a trait that protects them from hunters, loggers, and unwelcome wanderers who enter the forest without permission. In Akan cosmology, the forest is not an empty space. It is a living realm where spirits, ancestors, and elemental forces coexist alongside humans. The Moesha belong to this older world, a world predating the towns and kingdoms, a world where the land was governed by sacred covenants. They dwell in the groves that are older than memory, especially those tied to silk cotton trees, odum trees, and ancient fig trees. These groves are treated as shrines because they are seen as the meeting point between the human world and the spirit world. The Moesha guard these thresholds fiercely. They are known for testing the character of anyone who ventures into their territory. A respectful traveler may be guided safely through the woods. A disrespectful one may be punished in ways subtle or severe. Bewilderment, illness, paralysis, or strange disturbances that follow the person home. A common description says the Moesha move silently, with a speed that seems impossible for their size. Their backward feet confuse pursuers, and their laughter is said to come from all directions at once, making it unclear whether they are beside you, behind you, or standing directly in front of you. Some elders insist they can become invisible or blur into the bark of trees, appearing only as quick shadows. Others say they braid grass into charms, speak in high whistles, and carry tiny bowls capable of striking a grown man with sudden paralysis. In many stories, their presence is first noticed by unusual stillness in the forest, birds going silent, wind stopping suddenly, or a shift in the smell of the air as if the forest itself is holding its breath. East of the Congo Basin, stretching through the equatorial forests of Central and West Central Africa, many Bantu-speaking peoples preserve stories of the Aziza, a race of tiny, elusive forest beings whose presence is felt long before it is ever seen. They are known amongst the Fawn of Benin, the Yu of Togo and Ghana, and in echoes among neighboring Bantu groups whose older traditions still whisper of forest spirits who move beneath roots, between tree trunks, and through undergrowth so thick that daylight sometimes never reaches the ground. To these communities, the Aziza are definitely not imaginary creatures, but a part of the spiritual architecture of the forest, very much real. Beings older than the villages, older than kingship, and older than the first carved drums that carried messages across the region. The Aziza are described as minute, supple-bodied forest dwellers, small enough to step across palm fronds without bending them, and light enough to run across leaf litter without making a sound. Their skin is often said to shimmer like dark sapwood when caught in the faintest light, and their eyes glow with an amber or golden sheen in the dimness of the forest interior. Some elders say their feet never point forward like human feet. Others say their footprints vanish within seconds, as if the forest itself erases their passage. Hunters claim that the Aziza slip through roots like wind through cracks, that they can flatten themselves against the bark until they appear carved into it, and that they can climb trees faster than monkeys. In traditional cosmology, the Aziza are keepers of forest wisdom, guardians of medicinal plants, and watchers of sacred groves. They are credited with teaching early hunters how to carve arrows, use herbal poisons, and understand the behavior of spirits that dwell deeper in the forest. Stories say they reward humility, caution, and silence, the qualities prized in hunters who must live in harmony with the land. But they despise arrogance, intrusion, and the breaking of taboos. And for this reason, there are areas of the forest where elders warn young men never to go, especially at dusk, when the boundary between the human world and the Aziza's world thins like worn cloth.
The tale of the young man who mocked the Aziza is remembered across many communities in slightly different forms. Yet the heart of the story never changes. He was known for his sharp tongue, his laughter, his habit of dismissing the warnings of his elders as nothing more than superstition. One evening, as the cicadas began their night song and the thick forest canopy turned the world into a darker shade of green, he wandered into a part of the forest his grandfather had warned him never to enter. This grove was a place of watchers, a crossroads of unseen presence, a place where even the animals stepped lightly. As he walked deeper among the trees, he noticed something strange at his feet, a perfect ring of lights flickering softly on the forest floor, like glowing embers arranged in a circle. Curious and unafraid, he stepped closer. But as he approached, the truth sharpened in his eyes. The lights were not embers, they were reflections. Dozens of tiny golden reflections staring back at him. They were eyes, small, unblinking, golden eyes set low to the ground, arranged in a perfect circle, as if an entire ring of beings crouched beneath the ferns, watching with an unnatural stillness. Before he could move, a cold wind swept through the clearing, a cold that did not stir the leaves, did not bend the grass, did not sound like any wind he had ever known. It passed through him, stealing the warmth from his chest and the steadiness from his legs. The forest fell silent. Even the insects stopped. He felt the weight of dozens of little gazes pressing into him, and something like thin, invisible threads tugging at the edges of his thoughts. Then, without sound, without warning, the circle vanished. The eyes blinked out as if swallowed by the earth itself. The young man ran, blindly, desperately, through a maze of trees and vines, guided only by the instinct to flee whatever had gathered there. When he finally stumbled into the camp long after nightfall, he was shaking, pale, unrecognizable. Those who saw him whispered that he looked as though he had aged years in a single hour. By morning, the elders saw something else. The hair at his temples had turned white. He refused to speak of what he saw, and when they pressed him, begged him for answers, he told them only one thing. The forest looked back.
In southern Africa, the Zulu and Xhosa speak of a being known across the region as the Tokoloshe, a little creature with a reputation so fearsome that some families still elevate their beds on bricks to prevent it from reaching them at night. The Tokoloshe is described as small, hairy, and powerful with eyes too large and movements too quick for its size. Some say it can become invisible when it drinks from a ritual mixture, allowing it to slip into homes unseen. One of the oldest tales tells of a village where people began walking breathless, as if hands had pressed on their chests during the night. The elders believed the Tokoloshe had been summoned by someone holding a grudge, because these beings rarely move without intention. A young woman claimed to have seen it crouched beside her sleeping mat, its face twisted into a human-like sneer, its mouth stretched unnaturally wide. When she gasped and tried to rise, it vanished into a blur that sucked the air from the room. The next morning, strange footprints appeared outside her hut, shallow at the toes, deep at the heels, as though the creature walked backward and dragged something unseen. Across Angola, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and surrounding regions, the Shakwe and several related Bantu-speaking peoples tell of one of the most chilling stories in Central African folklore, and that is of the Kishi, a deceptive, shape-shifting being with two faces, a human one in the front and a hidden hyena face behind the head. Though the Kishi is not always described as a tiny being, many traditions explicitly state that it can shrink its body, compressing its bones and joints to slip between thickets, crawl through narrow ravines, and hide beneath roots and brush. In this form, it moves like a living shadow, then quick and disturbingly silent. This ability places the Kishi within the larger family of African little people lore, beings who are not merely diminutive, but dimensionally flexible, capable of moving through the earth and undergrowth in many ways that no human could replicate. The human face is said to be beautiful and speak sweetly, using charm and flattery to lure its victim into a false sense of security. It tells stories, compliments the listener, asks to walk with them under the dusk sky. Its voice is described as melodic, persuasive, and strangely calming. But the second face, the hyena, has a voice too. It whispers, it growls, it gives commands, it hungers. Villagers say the two faces argue inside the same skull. One wants companionship, the other wants flesh. Some elders describe hearing a Kishi muttering to itself, one voice pleading softly, the other snarling in agitation. These accounts make the Kishi one of the most psychologically complex spirits in the region's lore. Not just a monster, but a divided being whose dual natures coexist in constant tension. In many traditional descriptions, the Kishi moves with a gait that is simply wrong. Its knees bend both forward and backward. Its arms are sometimes longer than its legs. Its spine flexes in unnatural waves when it shrinks to its smaller size. No matter the form, its movements are described as fluid but disturbing, like a marionette pulled by strings from multiple directions. Children are warned, if you see someone walking with a strange shadow, do not speak. If you notice a person whose back seems to breathe, run. Because the Kishi, even when disguised as a normal human, rarely hides the strange behavior of the second face. Reminds me of Freak Show's 4th season of American Horror Story, Edward Mordrake, the hint of the freak show with two faces. Good job, Ryan Murphy. Across the Great Lakes region of Central and Eastern Africa and modern-day Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, northwestern Tanzania, and parts of the eastern Congo, stories circulate of tiny elusive spirits who dwell between the human world and the realm of the ancestors. Among the Haya, they are called Batumbula. Among the Banyoro, they may be linked to Bachwezi descendants or forest spirits. And among the Baganda, they merge with tales of Balube, messengers, and Mizumu, trickster beings who haunt the threshold of night. Names shift from community to community, but the descriptions remain strikingly consistent. The Batumbula are said to be small, knee height or smaller, with reddish or dark earth-colored skin, bright, watchful eyes, and heads slightly too large for their thin bodies. Their size is never portrayed as childlike. Instead, it is unnervingly disproportionate. As though the spirits compress themselves to slip through the cracks of the world. They dwell in termite mounds, beneath fig tree roots, and inside abandoned shrines, all places associated with ancestral presence, earth power, and the subtle boundary between the living and the unseen. Termite mounds in particular are sacred structures throughout the region, natural cathedrals built from earth, heat, and darkness. Many communities forbid disturbing them because the mounds are believed to house spirits, lost travelers, or watchers of the land. This makes the Batumbula guardians of sacred places and trespassers into human affairs. Descriptions of their behavior reflect this duality. The Batumbula are clever and unpredictable, walking the fine line between playful mischief and sudden danger. They are known for their ability to mimic human voices perfectly, especially the voices of children and women. A trait that mirrors other African little people lore, such as the Aziza of West Africa or the Abattoir farther south. But the Batumbula's mimicry is not innocent. They use it to lure, confuse, and test the living. An old tale whispered among the Haya and retold across lakeshore settlements describes a family who heard a child calling outside their hut night after night. The voice sounded frightened and small, begging to be let in.
Help! 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 Let me in, please! Ah! It's going to kill me!
Who's there? Anybody? Where are you? It's safe now. Just come out.
But each time the father stepped outside with the torch, he found nothing but darkness and the slow sway of the reeds near the water's edge. Only the night insects answered him. Suspicion grew. The family began to keep the children closer. The father began sitting upright at the doorway during the late hours when the world is deepest. One night, when the moon was thin and the fire embers glowed faintly, the voice called again, soft, trembling, distinctly that of a young child. But this time, the father did not move. He simply watched. And then he saw it. A tiny figure no taller than his knee, crouched near the cooking stones just beyond the threshold of light. Its head was too large for its body, the eyes too bright. The grin stretched across its face with no movement or blinking. Its skin looked like packed clay, as though it had risen directly from the earth. The father stepped forward slowly. The Batumbula's grin did not fade, but its body did, collapsing into movement so quick it seemed to flicker. It dashed into a nearby termite mound, vanishing through a crack far too small for any living thing. The father approached the mound with caution, but there was nothing to hear. No scurrying, no voice, no breath. The night swallowed the noise completely. At dawn, the family returned to inspect the mound. During the night, it had collapsed inward, leaving a narrow, unnatural hollow. When they examined it more closely, they found that the tunnel inside reached down at a steep angle, far deeper than any termite, mold, or human hand could dig. The interior walls looked smooth, as though shaped by something small that had dragged fingertips along the earth repeatedly. From that day forward, no one in the village walked past that mound at dusk. The Batumbula, like many little people traditions across Africa, are not merely mischievous spirits. They represent a worldview in which the land is sentient, the unseen watches the seen, and the smallest beings hold ancient authority. Their mimicry is not only a trick, but a reminder. Humans do not control the forest or the night. Humans simply move through it, borrowing space from older beings who have lived beneath the soil long before the first kingdoms rose along the Great Lakes. Their connection to termite mounds and fig trees, both sacred ecological sites, underscores their role as intermediaries between humans and the land, between the living and the ancestral, between the civilized world and the deeper, older world just below it. To encounter a Batumbula is not simply to meet a trickster. It is to cross into a place where boundaries fail and where voices can no longer be trusted to belong to the living, as we think of it. And for many families from that region, the lesson remains the same. If you hear a child calling from the darkness, count your children first. Then, if all are safe, do not answer. And this concludes the first tape of the Tales of the Little People. Ta-ta, folks.
Help! 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 It's going to kill me! Help!